Did it happen?
Ooh.
Yeah, there it is.
We are live.
Here we are.
She lied. It's still in my corner.
It's still in your corner.
You're still in the corner. But
At least your face isn't covered.
That's okay. I'm all right with it. Yeah.
I'm still disappointed that it's not the doc anymore because that was my favorite. But
But, yeah.
Welcome everybody to Compassionate Connections, and we're glad to have you with us tonight. We're going to be talking about OCD, addiction, and becoming a therapist. So that's kind of what's on the agenda this evening. So I guess I'll introduce myself and then let us all go around. How do you feel about that, Neil? You feel good about that?
Feel
Good.
awesome about that.
Okay. Yeah, like this way. Okay. Very good. So I'm Lauren Rosen. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in California, as well as a number of other states now. And I also live with OCD and in recovery from substance use disorder. And I'm really glad to be here to talk about this. Popcorn, Neil.
Nice. Hey, everyone. My name is Neil Hemmer. I am a clinician who also has OCD and who also struggles with substance use disorder. I'm almost 2.5 years, like 2.5 years sober, which is pretty sweet. But yeah, I work with people who have been affected by sexual violence in some form or another, and do some trauma-informed care upon them. Popcorn to Patrick.
Hello. I'm just a therapist. That's all. Sorry. No. Patrick McGrath. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer at OCD. Great to be here with everybody. And, Lauren, now that your name is Rosen, Neil will know this. Every time I hear your name, I get there's a car dealership in Chicago and the jingle is Rosen, Rosen, Rosen.
Yes.
I'm really glad that's what you associate with me, Patrick. That's excellent.
Your name change makes me just Rosen, Rosen, Rosen. Yeah, there you go. So anyway, hi, Lori Johnson. You can go next.
For me, hi, I'm Lori Johnson. I am also a clinician. I think more recently have been saying I always have subclinical OCD type of symptoms. And my history with substance use comes from my family of origin. So lots of experience as a family member and as a supporter. And that's what I specialize my work in, is both OCD and substance use disorder and addiction. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. Well, it's exciting to be here with all of you. And I think my role as the non-substance use or OCD person was going to be just to throw some questions out to everybody. And but please don't. I'm not here to take over or anything like that. Just to help get the ball rolling. And Chrissy just said, not yet, but who knows? Maybe in the future.
Oh, I think she. Yeah.
Maybe that was about something else, but it was pretty funny.
It was perfectly timed. I think it was about something else, but it was perfectly timed.
Yes.
Timed.
Funny anyway. That's how it goes. So, I think one of the things that we could start off with is just the very basic question that your presence here has answered already, but still warrants a discussion. Can I become a therapist who treats things that I have? And let's start there.
Can I take this one first? Okay, so what's funny is I actually took a job that directly relates to one of my episodes, and it's like directly linked to it. So sexual violence and harm OCD and all of those things that have been my main episodes for years. I mean, ever since I was as young as 5, I've had extreme violent and horrible thoughts. So to think that I would be at this part of my recovery where I can do this job way back when I was sick, it felt totally impossible. Mm-hmm. But I think that this is not only that question, Patrick, but the question I hear often is like, well, people who have OCD and are going to become therapists are like, well, shouldn't I treat OCD? Right. It's like the antithesis of your question, like, well, right, I have OCD, I understand it so well, shouldn't I be treating it? Right. So from my experience, it's both. Right.
Right.
I think you can become a therapist with the thing that you are struggling with, right, or with the diagnoses you have, and treat those things. And then also, like me, I personally never want to work with people with OCD. That is like too close to the subject for me. And I'm
sure
everyone has told me a million times I'm going to wrap around one day and I'm going to be treating people with OCD, which will be just fine with me. But it's too close to the subject. I think it would be too triggering, right? So you can become a therapist, and then you can also just go do something totally unrelated. For me, it's totally related to my OCD, but that's a personal choice.
Sure.
Yeah. In some ways, it sounds like that would be even more more triggering than working with people with OCD.
It's
for whatever it's worth.
Yeah. Or even in the substance use, alcohol use realm. That's kind of a common thing. I think people, whether you're in AA or in other platforms of recovery, you feel like you want to be of service and give back and help people along their journey. I think a theme, with OCD particularly, that people tend to catch on to and can easily kind of like rip the rug out from under you is like, well, what if I'm not recovered enough? And if you're able to like healthily get through graduate school and put all of that effort in, like, right, graduate school is like meant to kind of weed out, right, even in the application process, like weed out people who are not able to do that. And that doesn't mean you give up right away. But if you're at a level of your recovery, like recovery isn't perfect either. So if you're able to, give back and still have those boundaries with yourself, it's totally an acceptable thing. And is really common in the addiction and substance use realm, and with OCD, like peer support and all the things that all of our amazing, all of you and our amazing colleagues do. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, I agree with what you guys both said. I think that it is not only possible, but it's something that's worth all of the hard work that it takes. I think that there's little else that I personally can imagine finding more meaningful doing with my life than trying to, and I don't think it matters the diagnosis. I think it's about seeing people in their darkest moments and offering them a hand and saying, look, there's hope. We're going to walk through this together. It's a pretty, I don't know. It's been highly meaningful for me.
I think going maybe off of what you said, Neil, that notion though of triggering. I mean, I can say as a therapist, you don't have to have OCD to hear intrusive thoughts and still internally be like, whoa, wow, that makes you think about things, right? We're very good at a poker face and being able to go, tell me more, right? That kind of thing. But it's not that we have to be immune to what we hear and just be a blank slate to everything and have no reaction to it. We have reactions. We know how to handle them and we know how to move forward from them. But on one hand, Neil, you've said it would be too triggering to work with OCD. Lauren, you've said you can't imagine doing anything else in your life. I like the fact that you can have two different answers to that question. I think that it's awesome. And it shows how much of a personal choice that it very much is, and that there isn't a right or wrong answer in that. And I wonder if sometimes people going into doing this field, think, oh, well, other people do it, so I have to do it, or what would it mean if I don't do it? So I'm glad to hear in many ways a polar opposite answer from two people. I think it's great. So,
Well, I almost think that there's like, I've also heard that, and even from a few close friends of mine, that it's like this duty bound thing, right? Like these people have, especially people who have been inpatient, right? And they get really attached to their inpatient providers and are like, I want to be that. I have to be that for someone else, right? Now that I'm better, I really should pursue this path because this person saved my life, right? Yeah, and I always think you can go do something totally different. You could be a woodworker in the middle of Oregon. Who cares? Like you're not duty bound to do anything if you don't want to.
No, and the amazing thing is that by doing whatever speaks to you, you're going to be in a position because you're going to meet people and you're going to meet people with symptoms. And if you are willing, not everyone is, and this is not a judgment of those who are not, but if you are willing, you will always have an opportunity to point somebody in the right direction and to help them just by virtue of the fact that you understand the disorder, having gone through it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Lori, anything on that?
My brain just went totally blank.
That happens too.
I love it when that happens.
Yeah.
It's the best.
We're just going to roll with that.
It's good.
Yeah.
Is there an evolution in that experience of the choice to treat? I mean, I walked into a postdoc and within a week was like, oh, well, I'm going to do this the rest of my life. I was just, that was like, okay, this fits me. It fits my personality and things of that nature. I had assumed I was going to be a college counseling center counselor, have my summers off and help people choose what major they wanted. And within a week changed the entire trajectory of my life when I was on postdoc to, I'm going to run an anxiety disorder clinic for the rest of my life. And that's what I'm going to do. So I saw that switch happen. But is there an evolution in the decisions for you guys of what you've wanted to treat or how you've wanted to treat things in terms of, like, Neil, did you ever think maybe one day I would treat OCD, or Lauren, maybe I don't ever want to, this is hard enough. And is there an evolution through all those things? And Lori, going away from your family of origin to now doing this work, how do you kind of go from that to where you are now? So I think hearing your journeys to where you're at would be interesting. I'd love to know whatever you're willing to share about how you got to where you are today and to the comfort that you have with what you're doing.
Go ahead, Matt.
No, Lori, you go first.
We'll start with Lori. Well, since her mind went blank before, we'll give her a redemption.
Yes, I'll be on the spot. I think it has been an evolution. So I was one of those people. I had a full-time job in like corporate America, financial industry. I needed to pay the bills. I had a house. I was really young, and I knew it was going to take me a while to get through school. So the whole time I knew I wanted to be a therapist, and I didn't know what specialty I wanted. At the time, I was kind of like, whoa, this alcoholism and all this stuff, this is like way too close to home. I don't want to specialize in that. So from the get-go, I was like, yep, that's the only thing I know I don't want to do. And little did I know my life would lead me back to that. And I think there was kind of some pivotal points of like sitting in Al-Anon meetings and getting support myself and going through, my own therapeutic journey and coming to more understandings. I was like, okay, I'll give this substance use stuff a try. I worked with like on a lockdown unit for like adjudicated youth, and they are freaking hilarious and come from the most rotten situations and show so much resilience. It was really fun in all of the, teen and children environments that I worked in, despite the trauma they experienced. But the one thing I kept kind of seeing in every treatment facility I was in was OCD. I was like, their anxiety doesn't get any better. Like, do you think this is OCD? And I was the youngest one in there and not really that serious because I was like part-time school, part-time volunteering, part-time at this job, full-time over here. So I didn't really get listened to, but I kept seeing that like every place I would go, whether it was volunteer or whatever. And that's how I kind of stumbled upon the treatment of OCD and being able to kind of specialize in those portions, and then made it my goal to combine the two because I saw so much overlap. But yeah, I did not expect that I would be treating I certainly didn't even know that I had OCD type symptoms when I was younger. And certainly did not think I'd be helping other people with addiction and substance use, like at all. I was like adamant. That was the only thing I did not want to do. So it's just interesting. And I forget about those things. You know, you forget what you never said you were going to do when you were younger.
Right.
Never say never. That's what our elders say.
Never say never. Lauren, how about you?
Well, I started when I was an undergraduate. I was still pursuing like a career in theater, but I actually decided that I was going to switch majors and get my degree in psychology because I'd always been really interested in it. And I thought, this whole acting thing doesn't work out. I better have a backup, not a degree in theater, because I didn't want to teach theater. So I went to UCLA. I got my degree in psychology, but when I graduated, I was like, I don't know what therapy I want to do. I'd always been really interested in human behavior and how people ticked and wanted to support people, like love helping people, but I don't think I'd found the thing that spoke to me so much that I had to do it. And so I went a totally different direction. I worked in film and television for like 5 years, and at somewhere in there, maybe a couple years in, I got really stuck with my own OCD. I did not know it at the time. I'd had symptoms since I was a kid, but never been diagnosed. And I ended up in therapy for it. And it was then at the end of my own journey and like finding myself in a place of a little bit more solid footing that I was like, this is it. This is the thing that I want to do. And it's funny because I feel like I jumped in with both feet and was like, all right, how are we doing this? We're just going to go for it. It wasn't really until, which is unlike me, I usually, unsurprisingly, tend to overthink things. And not that I didn't, but I don't think I realized just how triggering it could be in moments, especially around, Lori, what you were saying earlier, especially early on in the process of being a therapist. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing, which, at first you don't. I mean, you do, but, it's limited. But I certainly found that to be triggering. And in moments where my own anxiety has spiked and getting caught in that, coming into the room, the fraud narrative can get really turned up, even though anxiety isn't really a barometer for recovery, which of course I know that rationally, but in the moment when you're in it, it's like, I don't have anything to offer these people. Look at how anxious I am, which, but anyway, so I just wanted to say too, because you were talking about triggers, Patrick, and I think it's really important to say, like, this journey really has not been without triggers. It's been with plenty, and both in that realm that I'm talking about, and also just in like, oh wow, well, that's an existential spin. I could go down that road with you right now. That sounds fun. Mm-hmm. But it's also this really beautiful thing that I get to be held accountable in some ways, because I want to show up for my clients, right? I do the work. I see what they do. I'm inspired by them consistently. And also recognizing like, well, I gotta walk the walk, if I'm going to show up and do this work. Not perfectly, but.
Yeah.
Yeah. People always think that therapists just tell people what to do all the time, but that's never really worked for me. So is that how you all practice therapy?
No.
You get to tell people how to do their lives. They do it. Yeah.
They never do things.
Yeah.
Mm-mm. I mean, sometimes I'll be like, yeah, it might make sense to go toward your fears, but because most people don't really want to do that. But mostly it's about asking questions and seeing what in the world they want to do with their lives, really, when it comes down to it.
People always say that. I want your job. I don't really want to listen to people, but I want to tell people what to do. And I'm like, that's not what we do at all.
You don't want my job then at all.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh man.
How about for you, Neil?
Oh, I went on a long, winding journey of wanting to work with every population under the sun. I've been serving people, I guess, for as long as I can remember. But some of the populations that I've worked with or that are really close to my heart are people who are experiencing homelessness, anyone who has any type of disability, which is very close to my heart, and also older adults. The older adult population is really close to my heart. So I did different jobs, different times of my life, kind of working with those populations. And then when I got into my undergrad, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I was just still so sick when I went into community college and I started studying. I had my associates in human services, which is what I began with. I don't know what I want to do. But one thing when I began this journey is I always thought to myself, I want to work with the quote unquote worst of the worst. Right. When you're taught in social work school about like severe and chronic mental health conditions, right, they're talked about very like abnormal psychology, right? Schizophrenia and borderline personality disorder and all of these different like woo-woo, super hyper stigmatized things. I was like, I want to work with those people because I think that my OCD has always made me feel so other, right? In every social circle I'm in, I feel like I am the other. I am the outcast, right? I have this chronic condition of like not belonging. And when I heard that there were these specific conditions, right, that are so stigmatized that they're put in this category, right? I had a whole class, right, just called abnormal psychology, which was like these bad conditions. And I was like, I'm going to work with those people. So in my undergrad and my graduate school, I worked as a crisis counselor in a mobile crisis response unit, right? Running around and only having contact with individuals who are at danger for lethality, right? So I was the assessor and then placing people places. But I was too close to that subject because during that time I was drinking myself to death. So I was drinking myself to death, and then I was seeing people who were doing similar things and having similar feelings as I was. So boundaries were pretty non-existent. And then when I got sober, I was like, I want to go right back into that, just in a different way. I think that my OCD kind of informed my choices because the horrible things that have happened in my brain, totally imaginary, totally just intrusive thoughts wise, right? I think has made me uniquely prepared to hear very traumatic things and deal with them well and process them well. And, notice when it's getting too much and know when I need to take a break. But I definitely, OCD has been a winding theme throughout my whole helping journey.
On the flip side, then, you hear this information from the people that you work with. You still every day deal with your own things that are going on. Mm-hmm. There's got to be urges and cravings for both substances and for compulsions. Mm-hmm. How do you set a management program for yourself to be able to handle those types of things?
Well, I just got back from 5 days on a solo trip. I went into the middle of the Ottawa National Forest and just totally disconnected myself for 5 days. That was part of my management protocol. Was me knowing when I need to take a break and need to totally disconnect. I think that's something that we all should learn. I mean, not only as professionals, but just people in general, right? Like once I had to quit my crisis job, which was like my dream job. I was like, oh, I'm on the front lines. I'm meeting people at their worst days, right? And I'm the face they get to see for comfort. Once I quit that job due to my own personal issues, I realized that my boundaries needed the most work, right? More than just me getting sober was figuring out how to disconnect myself from work. And also knowing it was time to stop. That was one of the reasons why I went to social work is there's so many different facets of this field and so many different populations that we can work with that there is no shame when one population, right, that you think you want to work with is maybe too much, right? Or the organization you work for is too much or whatever, right? It is totally acceptable to switch disciplines, right? And I think that that's something that not when people think about going into the helping profession, I think they're thinking they have to find this one population that they like love. But a jack of all trades is not always a terrible thing. So escaping to the forest is like my main management protocol is just like, well, I need to grab my backpacking stuff and don't talk to me for a whole week. Another part of my management protocol is keeping up with like kind of my harm reduction stuff, drinking non-alcoholic beer if I am having a craving, kind of reinforcing that, you know, I like the taste, but I don't like the feeling that comes afterwards. So let's avoid me drinking alcohol altogether. And then attending meetings. I think reaching out to my friends and realizing when I'm getting to my burnout point and realizing when my OCD is acting up and my cravings are acting up, realizing when I need to reach for help. And I think that vulnerability is, I guess, another important point.
I agree with Neil. I like to be alone. I need to kind of like collect my thoughts and like let my body and my brain reset because I'm dealing with, in my work, dealing with really complicated cases and dealing with supervision of complicated cases of my people. And then I have to be really mindful about not running out of energy in my own personal life. And I think that's the one thing that I have accumulated from my family of origin is the potential to be a workaholic and like do it all and figure it all out and keep accumulating and like filling those pieces up. And it's I can only realize that whenever it's silent, right? So being outside, being in nature. And Neil, I was totally freaked out. I was like, you're going to get eaten by a bear. That would have been ERP for me, but I totally would do it. I love nature. I love like delving into like creative projects and painting and photography and other things. Just like getting back in my body. So the way I do that, I think varies a lot depending on like where I am and what's going on. But I'm less likely to reach out to people and more likely to kind of like listen to my own internal instinct and kind of my true self, as they would refer to it, or my authentic self in like self-help books. But I mean, I'm 42. That's taken a really long time to figure that shit out. And I think like people read through a book and they're like, oh, it sounds easy enough. But to actually do it, like that's been really hard. So those are the ways I take care of myself. And my husband is like, okay, you're working too much. Like take some time off.
Mhm.
Well, but we joke, but that's a great, right? Like support systems are huge in that when like you don't realize that you're burning out. But you know, other people can tell you're either like, oh, being snippy or you're spending too much time at work or like something like that. And having trusted people who can tell you those things and you'll receive it well, right?
Yeah.
Instead of being like, fuck off, right? Like, don't tell me that. I know when I'm burnt out. I'm a therapist, right? Like,
I know what I need.
I know what I need. But no, having those trusted people in your life to be like, man, yeah, you seem like you're not hanging out with us as much, right? Like what's going on is an important piece.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And same, by the way, that's the same dynamic with TJ and I. He's like, I think you need to take a little bit of a break, honey. Like really, I'm like, that's probably true.
Mhm.
So I'm grateful for that. Yeah, I think my meditation practice is a huge part. I noticed it even today coming off of some, like the IOCDF conference and everything. Things have been really busy. Just trying to play catch up. And I noticed earlier today when I was sort of agitated, like I noticed tension. I just sat down and was with my breath for 11 minutes. And the simplicity of that, it not only does it support me in disengaging from any sort of mental compulsions, because I'm really bringing my awareness to like what's actually happening in the here and now instead of stories that are playing out in my brain, but it also helps me to sort of, I don't want to say relax because that's like, it's like a side effect rather than the goal.
Yeah.
But it does, because I'm not off on tangents, I'm just being, it's like there's more breath to it, more space to it. So that's big for me. I think also just knowing when I have to press the pause button, um, and abandon ship, because I think one of the things that I know for myself as somebody with OCD, I do not like to leave things unresolved. It is, I think, our kryptonite generally, and obviously it sometimes is very narrow in scope, but I find that for me it's everything. I don't like leaving things incomplete, and so oftentimes I have to do my own response prevention just around the work. Right? It's like, okay, nope, where I'm leaving that and it's only halfway done and I'm just going to go do something totally unrelated to this and screw it. Maybe I'll lose my train of thought and oh well, right? Because yeah, I think it's so, and this goes well beyond OCD, but it's easy to get caught in the rat race, I think, for those of us who have perfectionistic tendencies, which oftentimes, co-occurs with OCD. Uh, yeah, it can get tricky. So like it's not really a strategy. It's not like but just like pause and go is in some ways something that I like to keep in my back pocket.
I think something that Lori mentioned earlier too is part of my prevention protocol, right? Lori, you mentioned something about, or Lauren, maybe it was you. I don't remember, but someone mentioned something about like, we tell our clients these things, right? You got to practice what you preach.
Yeah.
And so once a night, at least once a day, I just sit there for like an hour or two and lean into my intrusive thoughts. Like I am constantly working on facing my fears. And Lauren, you made a good point about this job being an exposure like every single day, which it totally is. And, my mentor, when she recommended this job to me, knew that would be the case and was like, well, I guess it'll be good ERP. And it is, right? I'm like constantly facing my fears. And if I don't, yeah, I think that I would feel like a phony, right? I am treating these horrific, traumatic events every single day, right? And asking my clients to lean into that and write trauma narratives and perform EMDR and go back into their memories with me like Inception, right? And if I'm not at least spending a couple, times a week really leaning into my fears and continuing that, like, I would almost say like habitual work of recovery, then I would be lying to my clients, right? I couldn't stand to my clients and be like, well, let's just do one more EMDR session, right? Like if I'm not doing the same things on myself.
Yeah. That's a really great point. And I think that, goes back to like, we're not just telling you, like as a clinician, we're not just telling you to do what to do. And some people do that, right? Some people don't have that life experience to have to utilize these things. And I think like for both of you, that lived experience component of like, no, I do these things. Like Lauren, I attended one of your talks at the IOCDF conference on, I think it was mindfulness, ruminations.
Mental compulsions. It was on mental compulsions. Yep.
And just like, you're like, I do these things all the time. Here's what my experience has been. And I've kind of stretched this little muscle over time. That's exactly what that is. And I think it's important that we all practice those things too. And that's how we take care of ourselves.
Yeah. And honestly, the closer you are to it, like obviously I'm not bringing up my personal experience in therapy sessions. That's a different realm. Like I'm not like, by the way, I just had an intrusive thought and I'm not ruminating. That's like not it. But I think, can you imagine? That would not be
That'd
good.
be so funny if you just narrated your entire inner cycle.
Yes, you're just like, oh, my stomach growled. I think I'm really going to get a Jimmy John's sandwich for lunch.
It's going to be delicious. I'm not going to get one for you. Oh, wow. Maybe I'm a bad person. Okay. So, tangent. But I think that in the room, when I've just been through something, because they happen, right? They happen sporadically. I'm not in the thick of it right now, but it doesn't mean that there aren't times where it's like, it'll just, I'm like, oh, whoa, okay, hello. And when that happens, and I'm like, okay, I have to face my fear, and I have to accept the possibility that this thing is that I'm worried about is true, and I have to allow myself to open up to the terror that I feel, right? Like when I have to walk myself through that, I find that it helps me tap into my compassion for my clients, because it's easy to forget, even if you get a little bit of space from it. It's like, well, just do the thing, because obviously a lot of the fears themselves don't make a lot of sense. But yeah, I think in addition, it's just it sort of I find it helps me to describe at least how it might be coming up, so it gives them an idea that they're like, oh yeah, I see that, or it's a little bit different for me, or like, which I think you can get from having other clients with it too. It just so happens that it keys you in specifically, if that makes sense.
It totally does, and I think it's interesting, and maybe Patrick will ask a question about this, but I mean, now I'm talking about it. So, but I think one of the fears that I hear often about people becoming clinicians with either a severe mental health diagnosis or substance use disorders or whatever is that, right, their lived experience makes them lesser, right? Like they've had these horrible things and done these horrible things or whatever, right? They're not as equipped as some of these experts, or right, like I'm nothing like my own therapist. Doesn't matter. I think my lived experience makes me a better clinician personally. And I think it's exactly like things like that. And especially when I am explaining EMDR, or I am, administering it, or we're administering a trauma narrative or whatever, right? I speak about my own experiences and, right, like I know how this feels and I know how scary this will be, right? But we can do it together. And I know that. Right. That isn't just me talking out of my butt and reading in a textbook that we can get through it. I know we can get through it. Right. And I think that really, especially my little ones, especially like my tiny little ones, telling them that I've been to therapy without speaking in, specifics about what therapy I was in, makes them feel very at home. Like, oh, this isn't that weird. Nah, man, every therapist should have a therapist. That's the thing.
Which is depending on your program, one of the requirements of some graduate schools.
Some of them, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Therapy is cool.
Well,
and hard and equally difficult.
It is, and it's also, I think, speaking to that, it's also saying like you're not strange for not being able to see it in yourself. Like, yes, I have training, but there's also something just to the objectivity of this, that I'm not ensconced in your life. And there have been knowing that my own limitation in seeing my stuff is, and that's why I still go to therapy occasionally. It's like,
yeah. And the stigma and judgment that comes along with our entire world around what it means to go to therapy, and depending on where we come from, right? Whether that like going to therapy, taking care of yourself, seeking help from another person. Not all of us have had the ability to do that at every point in life. It is a very privileged thing, and it's a private thing, and it's a stigmatized thing. So I think wherever we come from, we might also have judgments about what that means to have struggled, even if it's in your past, or maybe bits of it are still going on. And I think like sometimes people get caught up on like what recovery actually means. You get to kind of define that for yourself.
Yeah. And maybe too, even if you're on this journey, going from somebody who's suffering from something, who chooses this role and becomes the therapist who works on it, that just because you're a therapist who treated doesn't mean you're cured, right?
That right there.
Yeah.
Wait, it doesn't?
Sorry, Lauren. I apologize. Yeah.
Okay.
Didn't mean to. Yeah.
Okay. I'll be okay.
Maybe it does, Lauren. Maybe. Let's lean into the uncertainty.
Spoiler alert, it doesn't. I was just being silly.
Yes. But how many people may have, I'm going to go back to, the word imposter came up earlier, and how many people have thought, well, if I'm still struggling with this, how could I help anybody else? Right. I mean, if I'll use Neil's kind of idea, if I'm going up a mountain with a mountain guide who struggles, I'm still happy to have a mountain guide through some of the areas because he knows the mountain better than I do. Because without him, I'm really struggling, right? So even if there's a little struggle on their part going along the way, it's better than not having them there with me. That's for darn sure. So,
Yeah.
It's a really good point. Yeah, and especially if your mountain guide was going up the mountain and he was out of breath or something, you wouldn't berate. I think.
Yeah. Hey, jackass, catch your breath. Take me up the mountain, damn it.
You're like, man, you really suck, right?
I thought you were an expert.
Yeah.
I have the best image in mind of Neil being Patrick Sherpa up some snowy precipice now.
Let's go, Neil. Come on.
Do it. That would be awesome.
This is good. This is excellent.
But I think that's the fear. I think, but not only with the imposter syndrome, but that's the fear of a lot of people I've spoken to, about becoming a therapist and having OCD, right? Is that oh, well, but maybe I'll have to take a day off or two, right? What if I have a panic attack? Yeah. Okay. That's right. Totally fine. Right. But it's a valid fear of they think people are just going to oh, you're an idiot, right? I'm going to berate you. They're not going to berate the mountain guide. That makes no sense. But it's fear. It's this very valid, real fear that people have that they're going to people are going to find them out.
Yeah. I think we all find a way. Obviously, you guys know with Susan, I never took a caregiver class about how to take care of someone who's in hospice and dying of cancer. And believe me, there's days I suck at it. I'll just be honest. There's days, we'll get into arguments about things, and I'm like, God damn, that was stupid. Why did I, But I'd rather be there and help than not be there and just have her suffer, right? So it's every day's a learning curve for me in how to care for somebody who's dying. And I don't care how many books I've read or, online forums I attend. There's still a learning process through the whole experience. I'm human, and that's the way it's going to be. So.
Absolutely. That humanistic quality, and even the most skilled hospice nurses, they're still learning every single day.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to be with my dad while he was dying.
Right.
That was my first and only experience,
But that's the thing is you don't want somebody who says that they know it all, right? Or that has it all figured out, because the only person who says that is a narcissist. I'm they're probably not going to help you very much. I don't know. I think it's all a journey, and that's such a beautiful example, Patrick, because we're all learning day by day how to be humans or therapists or partners, or there's no arrival point. So if that's the expectation, then it's gonna be a lot of disappointment.
And we're learning how to be parents and brothers and sisters and sons and daughters and all of those things. I'm gonna bet, going back to thinking of yourselves in the throes of maybe substance use or OCD, you've got a bit of a different relationship now, maybe with the loved ones in your life than you did back then. Right? Maybe a little, maybe, right? And if aren't we all allowed to evolve? Right? Can we all give ourselves that permission to be able to evolve?
I hope so. Yeah.
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 God, we should have just titled this talk that. Well, but I think a couple of things came up to me while we were talking about this, but the black and white thinking is one of my most favoritist cognitive distortions.
Yeah.
And it's one that I see a ton in people who are wanting to become a therapist, but have also been or suffered with their mental health at one point in their life, right? Is just this, I am not good enough, or I can't make mistakes, right? Like my therapist never made a mistake. Your therapist made tons of mistakes. They just didn't tell you. they just didn't announce like, oh man, I totally flubbed this session. My bad, right? Like they just didn't do that, which is appropriate, right? Therapists, you don't want your doctor taking blood and then going, shit, sorry, I missed the vein 18 times, right? They still got the blood. The job still got done, right? But maybe they fumbled the ball a few times, right? But people have this, wow, I got treated by an expert. I will never be to that point, right? And it's like, well, but what point is that, right? And so someone mentioned there is no end goal, right? There's no finish line to learning or evolving or becoming a better you, right? So people who think that there is this, and holding therapists on a pedestal, I think that's what a lot of us do, or I've done that many times in the past, that like, this person saved my life, so they have to be this Herculean character.
Yeah.
But they don't, right? And then that amazing kind of bond you create with a therapist who's really guided you through a tough time can also be destructive, right? Because then it paints this picture of therapists are perfect. I'll never be like that. I'm not good enough to lead someone like they led me.
Right.
All those kind of things.
I randomly quote the greatest band in the history of the world, Rush, in many of my therapy sessions. But the one quote that I use all the time is, from the point of ignition to the final drive, the point of the journey is not to arrive. Anything can happen. And so many people think they have to arrive first. And then once they arrive, then it's okay to go and do things. But maybe we don't ever arrive. I mean, the day that I think I figured out OCD is probably the day I die, right? That's because that's the most I'll ever know about it, is that day. Because every day that I do this work, I learn a little bit more about it, or how to deliver the work that I do with it, or something like that. So I'm never going to get there, and I'm okay with that. That's not the whole point of doing this, is arriving somewhere. It's going for the ride and picking things up along the way, and being able to disperse it to other people as I'm driving by.
It's a great quote.
Yeah. What song is that?
It's called Prime Mover. Mm-hmm.
Naturally. I don't think I know one Rush song.
I know I don't.
I had them in my head, Patrick.
I have Rosen.
There you go. That was not by Rush, by the way. Just so
that's disappointing.
They did not.
That was by Rush On Over to McAllen's Art.
There you go.
Yeah. I think well, and one of the things too, like taking it back to a kind of a form of therapy we don't talk about a lot in the realm of OCD, but I think absolutely informs the way that we treat OCD is sort of process, and looking at the relationship that exists in the room, and being able to identify, like, you know what, I didn't love how I showed up in that moment. Right. It's all about rupture and repair to some degree, even when we're doing ERP, and being able to own your stuff in that relationship is such an incredible way of modeling how to be a human. So, knowing that none of our clients are going to be perfect too, and showing up as imperfect people, we're essentially giving them the freedom to be, and if we can take ownership of our imperfections, so that they don't necessarily put us on a pedestal, then perhaps they too can see that they don't have to be perfect.
Yeah. Yep. I love to share my imperfections in therapy. Yeah. I think it makes us more real. We're not on a pedestal, right? I mean, I'm no better than anybody else I'm working with. I don't want anyone to ever think of that. I don't want anyone to be intimidated because I have a doctor word in front of my name or anything. I don't care about any of that. I just ultimately want someone, by the end of the time that we've worked together, to be somewhere that they wanted to be, but were afraid to get to. That's what I hope.
Isn't that the whole thing about life? Somewhere we wanted to be, but afraid to get to.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think all of life's ERP personally. I mean,
It
the
is.
entire existence is exposure and response prevention. If you learned how to ride a bicycle, you were on a big wheel or a green machine if you were one of the cool kids, and then you had a tricycle, and then you had the bike with the training wheels, and then you had a parent holding you, and then they let you go, and then you fell, and you could have said, well, that sucked, I'm done with that. Or you could have said, well, all right, we're going to try that again, and you get back up and you do it again. Life is ERP. Imagine not doing ERP, learning how to walk. Imagine the first time as a child you stood up and then you fell and you're like, well, screw that. I'm never doing that again. You'd fall for the rest of your life. You know, you'd be 50 years old at the OCD conference, crawling to the next room to go do your talk and crawling up the dais and everything like that. Because, hey, I fell once and that sucked. I don't ever want to do that again, right? No, we constantly are being exposed to things and hopefully learning something new all the time. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think the being in the community and like having all the interactions, and I know some people are kind of tuning in. I saw Margaret, Elise, and Michael. Part of those are through those own experiences from other people, just seeing like what they do and being in those experiences with them of like, oh, that's really funny, right? Whatever happens, you trip over a thing, you're crawling on the floor, like, yeah, you're struggling with that right now. And like, we're still able to show up together and support each other. And I think sometimes that can be difficult as well, but you're right. Like all of life is ERP because we'd never have any novel experiences if we didn't take some chances.
Right. And substance use to me says you can't handle life unless I'm there with you because I'm the buffer for you to get through life. And OCD says you can't handle life unless you follow along what I tell you to do because I'm the guaranteed path through this existence. And as long as you follow everything I tell you to do, everything's going to be fine or okay. And those are both lies that people are told inside of their head. And I think our job is to help people see that you don't have to listen to that. There's another path to go down other than the path that the internal voice is telling you that you have to do.
Totally. And I think actually through the lens of, because I totally agree, ERP, life is ERP, but through that lens, we can look at substance use disorder treatment as ERP as well.
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. Yeah.
Doing exposure to all sorts of thoughts and feelings and situations that provoke those things. And we're learning how to refrain from escape.
Yeah. Being at social events, being at family events, Christmas, holidays, all the things.
Going to work, making a phone call, whatever, right? Like there's so many things.
Driving past the liquor store you used to pick your beer up at when you were driving home from work before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is.
Every single day.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well, once again,
and you're not going to move, right? Like you're not going to move the house.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you eventually will move, Neil. I know that.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to like pick your house up and move it elsewhere or drive by like.
True.
Excuse me, Mr. Liquor Store or Miss Liquor Store owner, could you move around the block, please, just so I don't have to drive past you anymore?
Inconvenient to me, and that'd be great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Or gosh, I mean, just getting off the airport in Denver, it was like, hello, marijuana.
Everywhere. It's like, holy cannoli. And I live in California.
Uh-huh.
Like it's legal here too, but it was.
I don't know why we've gotten such like a big population of marijuana everywhere.
Boy,
I don't know what it is about Colorado.
There's a love of it out there in the Denver area, I have to say. So, yeah.
It's literally, I'll go on a bike ride or walk to the park. Like you can smell it somewhere. There's a grow house. There's a dispensary.
Yeah. So
triggering everybody right now. So
yeah.
True. Well, and bars. There's a big drinking culture here too.
Yeah. But, I always think of Margaret, and I'm glad she's on here. She even talked about how, just where a conference could be, and there's a bar in the hotel at every hotel you go to in the world, right? I mean, if we're going to have a conference at a big enough hotel, there's going to be a bar in that hotel. It's just going to be that way. And so, there's a lot of, maybe one of the things that people don't do well enough, and if they could take away something from this, is the prep work that people need to do when they get out of their day-to-day life and they go to do something. I'm going to be brave. I'm going to go to that OCD conference. Oh, but I didn't anticipate that there'd be a big bar in the lobby, right? Okay, so now I know that. Now I'm going to have to not only prepare for being around people with OCD and hearing their stories and everything, I'm also going to have to be around the fact that every time I walk through the lobby, there's a part of my brain that's going to be like beer,
Yeah.
something like that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of recovery on both sides is about walking into situations expecting for it to be difficult, and not that that's a problem, but just knowing like, oh yeah,
Yep.
I'm going to feel anxious likely today, or I'm going to have a craving for a drink or drug, likely, and that's
Yep.
okay. Like that doesn't need to go away. And I think, yeah.
Well, I think, Lauren, that's a really great point too, is like, though all of those things could be just like purely exposure without the response prevention piece, right? Like I go to the OCD conference and now I have to deal with the bar that's there. And I mean, after the conference lets out, like everyone kind of gravitates down there. And I'm going to plan to go back to my room and be proud of myself that I did that, instead of I got triggered and my recovery might be in jeopardy, right? Because OCD will latch on to anything. But being able to have that response prevention is like, oh wow, I didn't do it, or I reached out to a support, or I got through the conference and I didn't go down there all day.
Yeah.
Also,
go ahead.
No, it's frivolous. Go ahead.
I know we're getting close to our end time here, so I just wanted to make sure the three of you have any final words that you wanted to say, or advice to people who will watch this, who are thinking about going into our field, but know they've got a background and maybe have wondered in the back of their head, can I do this? Is this okay for me to do? What would you like to leave everybody watching with?
I think I'll go. That's okay. I think one of the things that I really loved about what you shared, Neil, about your work is that by going toward the thing that is triggering to you, you were doing the thing that mattered most to you, that you always wanted to do, right? Like you always wanted to work with this population of people who were in so much pain and so misunderstood and, were often written off. And I think the same from my experience. I know that the best exposures are the ones that are toward the things that I care about, that directly relate to things that speak to me and that are meaningful to me. And so, for anyone out there who's watching, that's the beauty of this path. If that's your experience, if you're like, this would really be meaningful to me to work with OCD or to work in this realm of being a therapist, even though it's triggering, that's the best exposure you can get right there, because you are going to have a clear reason to go straight toward the fear and to do it anyway and to show up. So, yeah, I think that's it.
Awesome.
I could say a million things. I mean, that it's such a hard thing to wrap up because this line of work has been the greatest blessing of my life. And I think that being able to turn my personal pain into something that just might benefit someone else at some point is the greatest gift I could have ever given, right? Or received, is being able to have this responsibility and be in this field. I think that there is a common misconception that this is like a very scary, I think it is a scary and sacred thing. I mean, I think social work, right, or counseling, or marriage and family therapy, or being a professional helper at all, right, is like a great responsibility. But we're all just humans. It comes from our inherent humanity that we do this work, right? It doesn't make us better. It doesn't make me wiser. It doesn't make me more skilled, right? And I think, yeah, there's someone with OCD right now out there, or someone who's watching this intoxicated and is like, I will never be at that place, right? You will. You will if you want to be, right? Because I'm inherently human and you're inherently human. And we're all just trying to help each other get to the finish line, right? So, I mean, I wish and I hope that if you are hearing this and you're thinking about going into this field, do it. If that's what you want to do, if that's the heart that you have, follow that.
Yeah. I would say this, similar to that, there are many different ways to be in a helping industry. And for me, I was in school. Every time I'd say, Grandma, I have something to tell you, she's like, please don't tell me you're going back to school. I was in school for such a long time, like on a part-time basis, and it took forever. And there were semesters where I couldn't afford to go because I couldn't afford to buy the books, even though my classes were paid for. And it didn't match up for a vacation that I wanted to take to. At the time, it was like coming skiing out to Colorado. Like there was a lot of sacrifices on the way. I never imagined myself being out here, and here I am. We don't know where our lives are going to lead us and the decisions that we're going to have to make in the future. So also not being married to one exact way that it's going to get done or a specific timeline, because for me, that was like so long. I was in school for like 8 years. By the time it was all said and done, I probably had an extra year on for graduate school. I don't even know. I try to block it out of my mind. I was a student for so long. And like, I didn't know where my life was going to lead me.
Yeah.
I didn't think I would ever leave Florida, and here I am. I thought Colorado was like, I'm just going to spend all of my money to go on one ski trip and never take a vacation again. But it felt like at the time. So wherever your journey and where your path lead you, don't let the experience and the things that you know about yourself and about people get in the way of that.
Yeah.
And you do it many, many other ways. There's plenty of ways to help.
Amen.
Awesome. Well, it's been an honor to spend an hour with all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to Game Changers for hosting tonight. We appreciate it. Chrissy, shout out to you. Thank you for everyone listening in tonight as well, too. And hey, everybody, make it a great day. Thanks so much.
And outro to Rush.